I found 3 high-quality pharmaceutical stocks that are all trading at or near 52-week lows, and those are Novo Nordisk, Regeneron, and Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Now, as a contrarian investor, whenever I see a stock that's down, especially if it's a high-quality, large, established company that's down, my mouth starts to water a little bit because I love to buy a quality company at a cheap price. So my first thought is, before investigating these 3 stocks, why are they all down? Because they all seem to follow quite a similar pattern. We're seeing pretty steady stock performance, nothing too crazy, up until about November. They all seem to tank. November, they tank. November, they tank. Now, it all happened at different times, but what I think might be playing a role in this poor performance in these pharmaceutical stocks is the appointment of RFK Jr. to lead the United States Department of Health and Human Services. Now, if you're like me and you don't really get into politics too much, you might not know what kind of effect that has. So thankfully, this article from The Hill digs into it a little bit. This article claims that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a vaccine skeptic. Now, whether or not that's true is not really what I'm trying to debate here in the video, but what is evident is that this is how he's perceived as a vaccine skeptic, and 3 large pharmaceuticals companies all dropped around November when it was announced that he would be appointed to the Department of Health and Human Services. So that's one issue, but it's not the only issue, of course. Novo Nordisk saw a massive drop after a new drug that they're developing wasn't as effective as people had hoped. Vertex Pharmaceuticals also saw some similar disappointing results. This study showed that their placebo, which is a fake pill, showed similar results to their drug. It's never a good thing. And that's one of the risks of investing in a pharmaceutical company. Pharmaceutical companies are incredibly risky businesses. They have to constantly be developing new drugs because their previous ones go off patent, which means that generics can come in and sell them for much cheaper. They have to constantly be spending their money on R&D and acquiring smaller biotech companies to fuel their pipeline, and they have to worry about the possibility that this drug that they spent billions of dollars on might not work as expected. So there's a lot of risks in this sector, but I think these 3 pharmaceutical companies, Novo Nordisk, Regeneron, and Vertex, might present a nice opportunity today. So I'm going to look at them as a financial analyst, and then I'm going to look at them in terms of someone who's interested in the pharmaceutical sector to see what's going on with their pipeline. So let's start with the financials. Here I've plotted out all 3 companies next to each other so you can compare some of their financials. The only field I left blank was international sales because Novo Nordisk is a Danish company, whereas the other 2 are American, so it wouldn't be apples to apples. What I've done is simply highlighted in light green if there was a company that quote-unquote wins in each category. So let me go through them quickly. Novo Nordisk is the largest. They're almost triple the size of the other 2. They all have very similar gross margins, which is not uncommon for pharmaceutical companies. Typically, they will see high gross margins because the cost of actually selling the drug is not very high. The real costs come from the R&D and the development of the drug, which are not included in gross margin. Here's where we see some discrepancy. SG&A to gross profit. Now, this is how much of that gross profit, now that is revenues minus your cost of goods sold, that's your gross profit. How much of that gross profit is going towards things like staffing, advertising, and the basic elements of running a company? Well, Vertex has the lowest at just 16%, and Novo Nordisk has the highest. Next up is R&D to gross profit, where Novo Nordisk actually has the lowest, and Regeneron has the highest. However, when we combine these 2, so research and development and SG&A out of gross profit, we can see that Novo Nordisk is the leanest company, spending the least amount of their gross profit on these 2 categories. So I'd say that's a point for Novo Nordisk. Next up, we have the balance sheet. So debt to equity. This is their long-term debt that they carry on their books divided by the total equity value of the company. So lower is better. That means you have less debt or larger equity. So we see that Novo Nordisk does have the worst balance sheet in this regard, and Regeneron has the best, so points to Regeneron. Next up is valuation. We have a price to annualized sales for Regeneron of 5, Vertex of almost 10, and Novo Nordisk of 7. So Regeneron is the cheapest on a price to sales. It's also the cheapest on a PE and price to free cash flow basis. So point to Regeneron there. And next up, we have revenue growth. Which company is growing their revenues faster year over year? We see that Regeneron and Vertex are very similar at 11 and 12%, whereas Novo Nordisk really takes the cake at 21%. We'll get into why that is in just a little bit. Also important to note is that Novo Nordisk is more of an established company and they do pay a dividend. It's about a 1.7% yield currently. Okay, so on a financial basis, I really like the looks of Regeneron because of their low valuation and Novo Nordisk because of their strong growth and financial prudence. I also really like Regeneron's balance sheet. Vertex also seems interesting, but on first glance, maybe not as interesting as the other two. But unfortunately, these are companies, not just lines on a spreadsheet, so we need to find out what they're actually doing. So when we look into this article on the top 50 pharmaceutical giants in the world, we can see a familiar name here. Novo Nordisk is the second largest pharmaceutical company in the world as of the end of 2023. So of course, this is a bit outdated. But even still to this day, Novo Nordisk is the largest company by market cap in Europe and still a pharmaceutical giant. As we go down the list a little bit, we find Vertex Pharmaceuticals and Regeneron at the 14 and 16 space. Again, this is a bit outdated, but what we're looking at is 3 of the top 20 pharmaceutical companies in the world that are all at or near 52-week lows. So let's start with Novo Nordisk and what they do. Their top-selling drug is called Ozempic, and it's a semaglutide injection. Ozempic treats type 2 diabetes and chronic weight management. Effectively, it's a GLP-1 receptor, and it helps lower blood sugar levels and can help out with weight loss. It improves insulin sensitivity and reduces appetite. It's usually prescribed alongside diet and exercise as a way to lose weight and potentially treat type 2 diabetes. It's been quite effective and very popular, especially here in the US. I know a few people who have used Ozempic and have found that it really does work. In terms of Novo Nordisk's pipeline, so these are drugs that are in development, not quite commercialized yet. In terms of their pipeline, they did have this disappointing announcement not too long ago where their new drug, which is called CagriSema, was not as effective as the market hoped it would be. Now, management, of course, spun this to say they demonstrate superior weight loss in adults with obesity. And of course, they're going to make the headline sound as nice as possible. But essentially, what really mattered was this here. CagriSema achieved a superior weight loss of 22.7%, whereas the market was expecting this to be 25%. Yes, I'm serious. This 2.5% discrepancy is what sent the stock down something like 19% in a single day. So this is what I mean. There are a lot of risks to investing in a pharmaceutical company. They have the potential to be very, very profitable companies and very, very good investments, but they also have the potential to be extremely volatile. So whether or not that drop was merited remains to be seen, but that's one reason why Novo Nordisk is down. And this is also what's going on with their pipeline. This is their up-and-coming drug candidate, and once again, it treats obesity and overweight. It uses basically a 50-50 blend of Ozempic and a new compound, which is called, and I'm going to butcher this, cagrilintide. It's a new investigational drug, so supposedly the combination of these two drugs is going to be more effective than just Ozempic on its own. Now, this has the potential to be a very large market, but whether this drug can continue to improve effectiveness remains to be seen. So that's Novo Nordisk. Let's move on to Regeneron. Regeneron's top-selling drug is Eylea. And I am not a big pharma guy, and I'm not a scientist by any means, so my knowledge on these topics is not the best, but I did try to do my research for this video. So while I'm not super familiar with some of these diseases, I can at least understand the importance of the drugs that treat them. Eylea treats wet age-related macular degeneration, or AMD, not the semiconductor company, different thing, and it's basically the leading cause of vision loss for elderly people, basically people over the age of 60. Not that over the age of 60 is old, just on the older side. What can happen is as you get older, your vision begins to worsen, and this drug helps to remedy that. It can improve blurred vision, difficulty seeing in low light, distorted lines, and dark areas in the center of your vision. So clearly an important thing, especially as the population continues to age. So as medical advances continue to improve, the population in general gets older and older and older. And as we have more and more in that older generation, we're going to need more drugs to care for them. So Eylea specifically targeted for the elderly, for people who might be losing their vision. Looking ahead, Regeneron says they have 40 therapeutic candidates in various stages of clinical development. They also have some really interesting collaborations. One that stuck out to me was Intellia, which is working on some really interesting gene editing technologies. So perhaps Regeneron might bring to market a CRISPR or gene-edited therapy sometime in the near future. We will have to wait and see. Also noteworthy here on Regeneron is that they did authorize a $3 billion share repurchase program, which means the company also thinks their stock is cheap. That makes sense. It's at a 52-week low. They are making lots of cash. Why not use some of that cash to buy back their shares, thus boosting their per share metrics and rewarding the shareholders who have been holding through this downturn. Looking forward for Regeneron, we see some other late stage pipeline developments such as Dupixent, which is a drug that treats inflammation. It's been used used for people who have eczema, which is a kind of dry, itchy skin condition, and other conditions, even like asthma. That one's been progressing well. I've actually seen commercials for Dupixent, so it is being commercially marketed at this point. All right, so that's Regeneron. Let's look now at Vertex, which I know I said I wasn't as excited about Vertex, but I am curious what they're working on. So Vertex's top-selling drug is Trikafta, and this is a drug that aims to treat cystic fibrosis, or CF. Cystic fibrosis is basically a genetic condition, and it affects your lungs, your pancreas, your internal organs, essentially. From the sounds of it, it's really not fun. It basically is a condition that makes your body produce this sludge stuff, kind of a mucus that can clog your lungs, and it leads to problems breathing and other digestive problems. It's really not good. So cystic fibrosis, not something that's good to have. Trikafta treats that. The interesting thing about the name, you notice that the first three letters are tri, the prefix that typically represents 3. This is a blend of 3 drugs. So it actually targets the genetic defect. So this is a genetic condition. And we're going to see a bit of a theme here with Vertex because they're also collaborating with CRISPR, a gene editing company. So Vertex very focused on genetic diseases. They have quite an impressive pipeline. I noticed at least 8 drugs that are in phase 4, which is the last phase of drug development. If I click here to filter on phase 4, we have 5 drugs treating cystic fibrosis, which is a disease I just talked about, 1 drug treating sickle cell disease, now this is the drug that they're developing with CRISPR, and 1 drug treating beta thalassemia, which is a blood disorder. Okay, so maybe that's only 7. I guess I can't count. I said 8 earlier. Oopsies. Anyway, Vertex, a very impressive pipeline, and like I said, they are working on some very interesting gene editing technologies as well. When we go to Vertex's news and events on their investor relations page, we can see this report from November 2023, so again, a bit dated, that talks about how Vertex and CRISPR Therapeutics were able to announce the authorization of the first CRISPR gene editing therapy, Casgevy. So whether or not you are a fan of the idea of gene editing technology, it's rather interesting that it's already being used to treat genetic conditions. This is quite interesting, and I wonder if they will be able to develop more drugs like this in the future and what kind of success this will have. Again, this is more of a niche target. However, as far as I understand, Casgevy is quite expensive, so even if they don't treat too many people, the amount of money that they can get from the insurance companies, assuming it becomes covered by insurance companies, could be quite significant. So, to summarize, we have Novo Nordisk with very strong revenues, very strong growth, a very large company known for treating diabetes with their Ozempic product. They fell flat on their face a little bit recently after some disappointing results from their next weight loss candidate. However, the sell-off may have been overdone because the stock looks pretty reasonably valued when you look at most metrics. Regeneron, Eylea is their big breadwinner, but they have a new drug coming to market, Dupixent, and this was the cheapest valued stock on all 3 of the metrics I look at: price to sales, PE, and price to free cash flow. Finally, Vertex. This is the most exciting one, dabbling in genetic disorders and gene editing technology. They have the lowest spending on an SG&A basis, but the stock is a bit more expensive on a price to sales basis. That's my analysis of 3 large pharma stocks that are all at or near 52-week lows. As a rule, I don't tend to invest in the pharmaceutical industry, but I must admit that I'm getting quite interested by these 3 stocks, so I'll definitely put all 3 of them on my watch list, and if I decide to open a position in any of them, I'll let my YouTube members know. I do offer a YouTube membership. If you'd like to support the channel, you get access to see everything that I'm buying and selling. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Please like it if you liked it. Please dislike it if you disliked it, and let me know what you would have liked to see instead. Please subscribe if you're new, and thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day.